Picture this. A woman finds out her husband is cheating. Heartbreaking, yes, but common. Now imagine discovering the other woman isn't just someone he met at work or an old flame from college. She's his half-sister, his own blood. And when that secret explodes into the open, it doesn't just destroy a marriage, it ends in murder. This is the story of betrayal so twisted, it left an entire Florida community asking one question: how could this happen? Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. This isn't fiction. This isn't some made-up drama designed to shock you. This happened in a quiet Florida suburb where neighbors knew each other's names, where kids played in cul-de-sacs, and where everyone believed they knew everyone else's business. But they didn't. Behind the perfectly manicured lawns and Sunday barbecues, a secret was growing. A secret so forbidden, so unthinkable, that when it finally came to light, it didn't just shock a family. It tore through an entire town like wildfire. Tonight, we're going to walk through every step of this tragedy. From the moment suspicion first crept in, to the night police lights flooded a residential street, to the courtroom where the truth finally, devastatingly, came out. So stay with me, because this story has layers you won't see coming. And by the end, you'll be asking yourself, could I have seen the signs? Would I have done things differently? Let's find out. Her name was Jennifer Hartley, and if you asked anyone in Clermont, Florida, they'd tell you she was one of the good ones. 34 years old, with warm hazel eyes and a smile that could light up a room, Jennifer worked as a third-grade teacher at the local elementary school. Parents loved her. Kids adored her. She was the type of person who remembered birthdays, who stayed late to help struggling students, who organized fundraisers and baked sales without being asked. She believed in people, she believed in love, and most of all, she believed in her marriage. Jennifer had been married to David Hartley for 11 years. They'd met in their early 20s at a mutual friend's beach party. David was charming, easygoing, the kind of guy who could talk to anyone. He worked in construction management, decent income, steady job. They weren't rich, but they were comfortable. They had a 3-bedroom house with a small backyard, a golden retriever named Max, and plans to start a family soon. From the outside, they looked like they had it all figured out. Friends described them as solid, stable, the kind of couple you'd want to be. But here's the thing about appearances. They're just that, appearances. And beneath the surface of Jennifer and David's life, cracks were already forming. Small ones at first, easy to ignore. A missed dinner here, a vague excuse there. David started working late more often. He'd come home smelling like cologne Jennifer didn't recognize. His phone, which used to sit casually on the kitchen counter, was now always in his pocket, screen down. When she asked about his day, his answers got shorter, more distant. Jennifer noticed. Of course she noticed. But she told herself it was stress, work pressure. Maybe he was planning a surprise for their anniversary. She did what so many people do when something feels wrong, but they're not ready to face it. She convinced herself everything was fine. Then, about 8 months before everything fell apart, someone new entered their lives. Her name was Melissa Crawford, and she was David's half-sister. Now, David had never been close to his father. His parents divorced when he was 7, and his dad remarried quickly, starting a whole new family across the state. David grew up barely knowing his father, and he'd never really connected with his half-siblings. So when Melissa reached out on social media, saying she was moving to the area and wanted to reconnect with family, David was hesitant. But Jennifer thought it was beautiful. A chance for healing. A chance for David to build bridges with the family he'd lost. She encouraged him to meet Melissa for coffee. She even invited Melissa over for dinner a few weeks later. Melissa was 29, 5 years younger than David. She was attractive, confident, the kind of person who commanded attention when she walked into a room. She worked in real estate, always dressed well, always had a story to tell. Jennifer liked her at first. She seemed genuine, interested in getting to know them, building a relationship. But as weeks turned into months, Jennifer started noticing things. David and Melissa texted constantly. They had inside jokes. They'd meet up for lunch without mentioning it to Jennifer until after the fact. Once Jennifer came home early and found them sitting a little too close on the couch, laughing at something on David's phone. They jumped apart when she walked in, and the room went quiet. Too quiet. When Jennifer asked David about it later that night, he got defensive. Said she was being paranoid. Said Melissa was family, and it was healthy for them to bond. He made Jennifer feel like she was the problem, like she was insecure and irrational. And for a while, Jennifer believed him. She buried her discomfort and told herself she was overreacting. But deep down, something didn't sit right. There was an energy between David and Melissa that felt off, too intense, too familiar. And the more Jennifer tried to shake the feeling, the stronger it became. The first real proof came on a Thursday night in late September. David said he had a work dinner and wouldn't be home until late. Jennifer was grading papers in bed when she realized she'd left her phone charger in David's car. She went outside to grab it, and that's when she saw his laptop sitting on the passenger seat. He must have forgotten it in his rush to leave. Jennifer brought it inside, planning to plug it in so it wouldn't die. But when she opened it, his messages were still up on the screen. And there, in a thread with Melissa, were messages that made Jennifer's stomach drop. Messages that were far from familial. Messages that talked about missing each other, about the way Melissa's perfume lingered on, David's shirt, about stolen moments and secret meetings. Jennifer sat frozen on the edge of her bed, staring at the screen. Her hands were shaking. Her mind was racing. She scrolled up. Days of messages, weeks of messages, months. They'd been seeing each other behind her back the entire time. But it wasn't just an affair, it was something else, something that made Jennifer feel physically sick. These weren't just two people having a fling. The messages had an obsessive quality. Melissa talked about how no one understood David the way she did. David said things like, "You're the only one who gets me, the only one who ever has." And then, buried in a conversation from 2 weeks earlier, Jennifer found something that made everything click into a horrifying place. Melissa had written, "I know people wouldn't understand, I know it's complicated, but we're not really related, not in the way that matters. We didn't grow up together. This is real, David. This is love." Jennifer's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't just cheating. This was something far darker. Something that crossed lines she didn't even know could be crossed. She sat there for hours, rereading the messages, hoping she'd misunderstood. But there was no misunderstanding. Her husband was having an affair with his half-sister, and from the looks of it, they both believed they were in love. Jennifer didn't sleep that night. She couldn't. By the time David came home at 1 a.m, she was sitting at the kitchen table, his laptop open in front of her. He walked in with a tired smile, started to say something about traffic, then saw her face, saw the screen, and froze. Jennifer's voice was calm when she finally spoke, but it was the kind of calm that comes right before a storm. She asked him one question. "Is this real? Is this actually happening?" David tried to deny it at first, said the messages were taken out of context, that Melissa was going through a tough time and he was just being supportive. But Jennifer wasn't stupid. She'd read everything. She knew. So she asked again, and this time her voice cracked. "How long have you been sleeping with your sister, David?" The word hung in the air like poison. David's face went white, then red. Then he exploded. He said Jennifer was twisting everything, that she didn't understand their connection, that Melissa wasn't really his sister, not in any way that mattered. They barely shared DNA. They weren't raised together. It wasn't the same as a normal sibling relationship. Jennifer listened to him make excuses, rationalize the unthinkable, and something inside her broke. This was the man she'd married, the man she'd trusted with her whole heart. And he was standing in their kitchen, defending an incestuous relationship like it was just another mistake. She told him to leave. David refused, said it was his house too. The argument escalated. Voices got louder. Things got said that couldn't be taken back. Finally, Jennifer told him she was calling a lawyer in the morning, that their marriage was over. David grabbed his keys and stormed out. And that's when things took a turn neither of them could have predicted. Over the next few days, Jennifer moved through her life like a ghost. She called in sick to work. She couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. She confided in her best friend, a woman named Sarah who'd known Jennifer since college. Sarah was horrified. She wanted Jennifer to go to the police, to expose what was happening, but Jennifer wasn't sure what crime had even been committed. Adultery isn't illegal, and while the relationship between David and Melissa was morally reprehensible, they were both adults. But Jennifer did start documenting everything. She took screenshots of the messages. She tracked David's location through their shared phone plan. She noticed he was spending almost every night at Melissa's apartment across town. And then, 1 week after the confrontation, Jennifer made a decision. She was going to Melissa's apartment. She was going to confront her. She needed Melissa to understand the damage she'd caused. Needed her to see that this wasn't some romantic love story. It was a betrayal that destroyed lives. Jennifer drove to Melissa's building on a cloudy Saturday afternoon. Her heart was pounding as she climbed the stairs to the second floor. She knocked on the door, and after a long moment, Melissa opened it. Melissa looked surprised but not afraid. She crossed her arms and asked what Jennifer wanted, and that's when everything Jennifer had been holding in came pouring out. She told Melissa that what they were doing was sick, that it was wrong, that David was her husband, and Melissa had no right to insert herself into their marriage. But Melissa didn't back down. Instead, she smiled. A cold, cruel smile that made Jennifer's blood run cold. Melissa said, "You think you know him, but you don't. David and I have a connection you could never understand. You were just a placeholder until he found me." Jennifer felt like she'd been slapped. Before she could respond, David appeared in the doorway behind Melissa. He looked exhausted, guilty. But he didn't defend Jennifer. He just stood there, silent. And that silence said everything. Jennifer turned and walked away, tears streaming down her face. But as she reached her car, she heard shouting from the apartment above. Melissa and David were arguing, loudly. And Jennifer couldn't help but wonder, was their so-called perfect connection already falling apart? 2 weeks later, on a Tuesday night in late October, Jennifer got a call that would change everything. It was 11:30 at night, and she'd just fallen asleep when her phone buzzed. The number was unfamiliar, but something told her to answer. On the other end was a detective from the Claremont Police Department. His voice was steady but serious. He asked if she knew a woman named Melissa Crawford. Jennifer's heart started racing. She said yes and asked what happened. The detective paused, then said, "Ms. Crawford was found dead in her apartment earlier this evening. We're treating it as a homicide, and we need to speak with your husband." The phone almost slipped from Jennifer's hand. Dead. Melissa was dead, and they wanted to talk to David. Jennifer told the detective that she and David were separated, that she hadn't seen him in days. The detective thanked her and said someone would be in touch. After she hung up, Jennifer sat in the dark, trying to process what she'd just heard. Melissa was dead, murdered, and David was a suspect. The next 48 hours were a nightmare. News spread fast in a town like Claremont. Local reporters picked up the story. Headlines screamed about a deadly love triangle, about forbidden relationships and violence. Jennifer's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Friends, family, reporters, all wanting to know what she knew, but Jennifer didn't know anything. Not really. She knew David had been with Melissa. She knew they'd been arguing. But murder? She couldn't wrap her mind around it. Then, 3 days after Melissa's death, police arrested David. They found his fingerprints at the scene. Security footage showed his truck parked outside Melissa's building the night she died, and witnesses reported hearing a man and woman shouting in her apartment around the time of death. David was charged with second-degree murder. When Jennifer saw his mugshot on the news, she barely recognized him. His eyes were hollow, defeated, and despite everything he'd done to her, a small part of her still felt sad. This was the man she'd loved, the man she'd built a life with, and now he was sitting in a jail cell, accused of killing the woman he'd left her for. The trial began 4 months later, in early February. Jennifer attended every day, sitting in the back of the courtroom, watching the man she'd married crumble under the weight of evidence. The prosecution painted a clear picture. David and Melissa's relationship had been intense and volatile. They argued constantly. Neighbors reported hearing them fight multiple times a week. On the night of Melissa's death, witnesses heard David shouting that Melissa was trying to control him, that she was obsessed and wouldn't let him breathe. The medical examiner testified that Melissa died from blunt force trauma to the head. She'd been struck multiple times with a heavy object, later identified as a marble lamp from her living room. David's DNA was found on the lamp. His story kept changing. First, he said he wasn't there that night. Then, when confronted with evidence, he admitted he was there but said they'd just talked. Finally, backed into a corner, he claimed self-defense. He said Melissa attacked him first, that she'd flown into a rage when he told her he was going back to Jennifer, that she came at him with a knife, and he grabbed the lamp to protect himself. But the evidence didn't support his story. There were no defensive wounds on David, no knife was found at the scene, and text messages recovered from Melissa's phone told a different story. In the days before her death, Melissa had been texting a friend, saying she was scared of David, that he'd become possessive and angry, that she wanted to end things but was afraid of how he'd react. The final text, sent just hours before she died, read, "He's on his way over. I'm going to tell him it's over for good. Wish me luck." She never sent another message. The defense tried to argue that David had been manipulated, that Melissa had seduced him, exploited their family connection, and then threatened to expose him when he tried to leave. But the jury wasn't buying it. After 3 weeks of testimony, they deliberated for less than 6 hours. The verdict: guilty of second-degree murder. David showed no emotion when the verdict was read. Jennifer, sitting in the back row, felt tears slide down her cheeks. Not for David, but for the life that had been lost, for the woman who, whatever her mistakes, didn't deserve to die, and for herself, for the future she'd imagined that would never exist. David was sentenced to 30 years in prison. At the sentencing hearing, Melissa's mother spoke. She was a frail woman in her 60s, her voice shaking as she addressed the court. She talked about how Melissa had struggled to find her place in the world, how she'd always felt like she didn't belong, and how, in some tragic way, she'd thought David was the answer. She said, "My daughter made mistakes, but she didn't deserve this. No one deserves this." Then it was Jennifer's turn. She hadn't planned to speak, but at the last moment, something compelled her to stand. She walked to the front of the courtroom, hands trembling, and looked at David for the first time since his arrest. And she spoke from the heart. She talked about betrayal, about the woman she used to be before all of this, about how his choices hadn't just destroyed his own life, but hers too. She said, "I loved you. I trusted you. And you didn't just break my heart. You shattered my entire sense of reality. I'll never understand how you could do what you did. To me, to her, to yourself." Her voice cracked, but she kept going. "I hope you spend every day of your sentence thinking about the lives you destroyed, and I hope, somehow, you find a way to live with yourself, because I don't know how you will." When she finished, the courtroom was silent. David's head was bowed. He didn't look up. After the sentencing, Jennifer walked out of the courthouse into the bright Florida sun. Reporters called her name, cameras flashed, but she kept walking. Sarah was waiting by the car, and together they drove away. Jennifer never looked back. It's been 2 years since that day. Jennifer still lives in Claremont, though she moved to a different neighborhood. She kept teaching, kept showing up for her students, kept rebuilding her life one day at a time. She goes to therapy every week. She's learned to trust again, slowly. She even started dating someone new, a kind man who knows her story and loves her anyway. But the scars are still there. Some nights, she lies awake thinking about the signs she missed, the red flags she ignored. She wonders if she could have stopped it. If she'd spoken up sooner, confronted things earlier, would Melissa still be alive? Would David be a free man? Would their marriage have survived? She knows, logically, that none of it was her fault, that David made his choices, that Melissa made hers. But knowing something intellectually and feeling it emotionally are two different things. This case shook a community. It forced people to confront uncomfortable truths about family, about boundaries, about the dangerous places love can go when it's twisted into something it was never meant to be. And it left everyone asking the same question: how do you spot the darkness in someone before it's too late? Jennifer doesn't have the answer, but she's learned something important. She's learned that trust is precious, that love should never cost you your peace, and that sometimes the people who hurt us the most are the ones we never saw coming. So what do you think? Could you have seen the signs if you were in Jennifer's shoes? Would you have confronted Melissa sooner? And how do you even begin to process a betrayal this deep? I want to hear from you. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Tell me how this story made you feel. And if you were moved by Jennifer's strength, let me know. Stories like this remind us that life can change in an instant. That the people we think we know can surprise us in the worst ways. But they also remind us that we're stronger than we think. That we can survive the unthinkable. And that even in our darkest moments, there's always a path forward. If this story affected you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And make sure you're subscribed